3 days before my son's retirement party, I drove to Hargrove's flower shop on Elm Street to pick up the centerpiece arrangements I'd ordered 6 weeks earlier. 62 years I've lived in this town. I know every crack in that sidewalk. Margaret Hargrove has been arranging flowers for this family since my husband's funeral in 2011. She did the sprays for his casket. She did the bouquet for my son's first wedding. She knows us. When I walked through the door, the little bell above it chimed the same way it always does. The shop smelled like lilies and wet stems and something green I can never name. Margaret was behind the counter wrapping white roses in brown paper. She looked up. She didn't smile. Margaret always smiles. "Is everything all right?" I asked. She set the roses down, came around the counter. Her hands were moving in a way that didn't match her face. Too fast, too deliberate. She took my elbow and steered me sideways, past the refrigerated cases, past the bucket of dahlias, toward the back of the shop where she stores supplies. She didn't say a word until we were behind the shelving unit and she pulled a curtain across the doorway. Then she turned off the overhead light. "Margaret?" "What?" "Shh." She gripped my wrist. "Listen." I held still. Through the wall, the shared wall between her shop and the insurance office next door, I heard voices. A door must have been open on their side, or the wall was thinner than anyone knew, because I could hear every word as clearly as if I were sitting at that table with them. My son's voice first, low, certain. The kind of voice he uses in board meetings, not with me. "The transfer has to happen before the party," he said. "Once she's surrounded by people who know her, it gets complicated." A woman's voice, my daughter-in-law. "She married my son 11 years ago. I gave a toast at their wedding about choosing a partner who makes you better. I meant every word." "What about the cognitive assessment?" she said. "Already scheduled. Monday morning. Dr. Fenwick said the evaluation takes about 90 minutes. Given what we've documented, he doesn't anticipate any complications." Margaret's hand tightened on my wrist. I didn't move. "The second trust," my son said, "transfers automatically once the assessment is filed. We don't need her signature for anything after that. The foundation assets move into the holding company, and from there, it's straightforward." $2.4 million, my daughter-in-law said. "Plus the house. The house Thomas and I bought in 1987. The house where I raised my son. The house where my husband died in the bedroom at the end of the hall." "Yes," my son said. "And the Whitmore accounts?" I bit the inside of my cheek. My vision was very clear and very strange, the way things look in the moment before something breaks. "We'll need to get through Saturday first," he said. "Keep everything normal. She doesn't suspect anything." A chair scraped. Footsteps. The door on their side clicked shut. Silence. Margaret turned the light back on. Her eyes were wet. She looked older than I'd ever noticed. "I'm sorry," she said. "They were here yesterday too. Same conversation. I didn't know if I should—" She stopped. "I heard your name. How long have you been listening?" "Since yesterday." She said it like a confession. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the shelving unit. There was a price tag on one of the supply boxes. $12.99. I remember staring at it. "I'll need those centerpieces," I said, "for Saturday." She blinked. "Of course." I loaded the arrangements into my car myself. 4 of them, wrapped in cellophane, smelling like eucalyptus and something sweet. I set them carefully in the trunk. I closed the trunk. I got in the driver's seat and I sat there for a long time without starting the engine. My son's name is Garrett. He's 51 years old. He has his father's jaw and my father's stubbornness. And 11 years ago, I watched him cry at his wedding like I'd never seen him cry before or since. I thought, this is the moment everything good in him comes together. I was thinking about that moment, sitting in that parking lot, when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. A text from Garrett. "Just checking in, Mom. Everything's set for Saturday. Can't wait to celebrate with you." I read it twice. I set the phone on the passenger seat and started the engine. My husband Thomas built Whitmore Family Trust in 2003. We were careful people. He was an accountant for 30 years. He believed in structure, in documentation, in not leaving things to chance. When he was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2008, He spent 18 months reorganizing everything so I would never have to worry. He said, "You took care of this family. Now I'm going to make sure this family takes care of you." He died 3 years later in January, on a Tuesday morning. It was cold. The oak out front had ice on every branch. I spent 2 years learning what he built. Trust law, investment structures, foundation bylaws. I went to meetings with attorneys. I asked questions other widows my age were too embarrassed to ask. I learned. Garrett was helpful at first. Patient. He explained things slowly, which I didn't need, but I let him. He seemed proud of that. The explaining. Somewhere around 2019, the helping shifted. Small things first. He started attending my attorney meetings without being invited. He'd mention offhand that I seemed tired, that these financial structures were complicated, that maybe I should let him handle the quarterly reviews. His wife started calling me more often. Caring calls. "How are you sleeping? Are you keeping up with your medications? Do you remember what we talked about at Thanksgiving?" I remembered perfectly. I still do. In January of last year, I missed a signature on a document reauthorizing the foundation's annual grant cycle. My assistant had sent me the wrong version, a clerical error, nothing more. Garrett came to my house that weekend. He sat at my kitchen table with an expression I recognized but couldn't place until later. It was the expression of someone who has been waiting. "Mom," he said, "this is the third thing this year. It was the first." "Dr. Fenwick," he said, "just to rule things out, just to be safe." I told him I was fine. I told him I had a clerical error, not a neurological event. He nodded and said, "Of course," and that was the end of it. But the seed was planted, the way he'd intended it to be, and for 3 months afterward I second-guessed every word I said in a meeting, every date I wrote down, every name I reached for half a second slower than I used to. I hadn't understood why until that flower shop. I drove home. The centerpieces were in the trunk. The house was quiet. I set the arrangements in the dining room and stood in the kitchen looking at my husband's photograph on the refrigerator, the one from 1994, the year Garrett turned 26, and Thomas and I celebrated our 30th anniversary with dinner at a restaurant we couldn't quite afford. Thomas is laughing in the photo. He always laughed like something was genuinely funny. "I'm going to need some help with this," I said to him. I was at my desk by 6 that evening, and by 8 I had made 2 phone calls. The first was to an attorney named Susan Cho. I'd used her for a property dispute in 2018. She was precise, humorless in the way competent people sometimes are, and she had never once talked to me like I was a widow who needed managing. I told her what I'd heard. She listened, without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Is there a document called a successor trustee amendment filed in the last 18 months? I didn't know." She said, "Find out tonight. Call me back." The second call was to a man named Roy Ingram. A neighbor's son had recommended him 2 years ago when the neighbor believed her financial advisor was stealing from her. Roy was ex-IRS. He had a flat voice and the kind of patience that suggests he has seen everything already and found it all tedious. I told him what I'd heard. He asked me 3 questions. The name of the holding company my son had mentioned, the name of Dr. Fenwick, and whether I had physical access to my own financial records. I said yes to the last one. "Good," he said. "I'll need scans of whatever you have, tonight if possible." I spent the next 2 hours at my filing cabinet. What I found in those files, or rather, what I didn't find, told me more than anything I could have heard through that wall. The original Whitmore Trust documents were there. The 2003 Foundation Charter. Thomas's letters of instruction. All of it in order, the way he left it. But there was a gap. A successor trustee amendment dated 14 months ago. I had signed it. I remembered signing something that Garrett had brought over after a Sunday dinner, something he described as a routine update required by the state. The notary was someone I'd never met. The attorney of record was not Susan Cho. It was a firm in Hartford I didn't recognize. I photographed every page and sent them to Susan. She called me back at 10:15. "This is not a routine update," she said. "I know. There's a provision buried in Section 11. It allows the successor trustee to petition for a competency review without your knowledge or consent. If a licensed physician certifies cognitive impairment, full fiduciary control transfers within 72 hours. No court hearing, no notification requirement. How is that legal? It's aggressive, she said, which is not the same as illegal. Someone drafted this carefully. This is not an amateur document. Can we stop it? Yes. But we need to move before Saturday. Once the party happens and the assessment is filed Monday, we're in a much worse position. I can file an emergency injunction to freeze all trust assets and flag the amendment as potentially fraudulent, but I need evidence of intent. I have Roy Ingram working on that. Good. She paused. There's something else. This Dr. Fenwick, do you know him? I'd never heard his name before. Garrett mentioned him in January. I'll look into him tonight. Roy called me at midnight. He didn't waste time on preamble. The holding company your son mentioned, Cedarwood Holdings LLC, was incorporated 8 months ago. Delaware registration. 2 partners, your son and a man named Philip Strand. I knew that name. Philip Strand was Garrett's college roommate. They'd grown apart after Thomas died, or so I'd thought. He'd come back into the picture around 2020, reappearing at dinner parties, texting Garrett constantly, joining him on a golf trip I hadn't been told about until afterward. What does Strand do? Asset management. His firm handles high net worth estate liquidations. He has 3 active clients right now whose families are in litigation over suspicious trust transfers. He's done this before. Roy's voice was even. Strand has been the named managing partner in 7 trust transfers in the last 6 years. In 4 of them, the original trustee was declared cognitively impaired within 90 days of Strand's involvement. 1 is deceased. 2 are in long-term care. 1 fought back. Her name is Vera Hutchins. She lives in Darien. She won her case in 2022, but the records were sealed. Can she testify? Roy said. I already called her. She said she'll do whatever you need. I closed my eyes. Thomas had been gone 13 years, and he was still, somehow, sending people to help me. Roy kept going. I looked into Dr. Fenwick. He has a clean medical license. No complaints, but he has provided cognitive assessments in 6 of the last 8 Strand-adjacent cases I can identify. In 5 of them, the patient was found impaired. In 4 of those, the patient's family contested the diagnosis. He's a contract doctor. He's a useful one. And your son paid him a retainer of $40,000 6 weeks ago. The wire came from a personal account. I have the routing number. I sat very still. Roy said, "There's one more thing." I knew from his tone that this was the worst one. Tell me. Your daughter-in-law. She's been sending financial records from your foundation to Strand's firm since March. Quarterly reports, donor lists, asset inventories. She has administrator access to your foundation email system. She's been using it. My daughter-in-law manages our foundation's social media presence. I gave her that access myself 3 years ago because she offered, and because I trusted her, and because I was trying to give her something that mattered. I understand, I said. Roy was quiet for a moment. Do you want me to keep going? Yes. He told me the rest. I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around me. The oak tree out front made a sound against the window. It always makes in November. I'd heard it for 37 years. At 5:30, I got up and made coffee and called Susan. She had found something. Dr. Fenwick, she said, is not just associated with Strand. He's Strand's brother-in-law. They share a home address in Westport. The assessment on Monday would never have been independent. It was written before he ever met you. We have enough, I said. Almost, she said. I need one more piece. We need someone who can testify to your son's intent directly. Not just documents. A person. I thought about Margaret Hargrove. She'd listened twice. She'd come to me herself. She'd held my wrist in the dark. I called her at 6 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring. I'll testify, she said before I asked. "I've been waiting for you to call." The party was Saturday evening, 70 guests at the Harwick Country Club. My son was retiring from 30 years in commercial real estate. There would be speeches, open bar, a slideshow of photographs. His wife had planned everything. I arrived early. Susan was already inside, at a corner table, looking like any other guest in a dark blue dress. Roy was near the bar, nursing a club soda. Margaret was seated at table 7 with her husband, hands folded, looking slightly too formal for a woman who usually had potting soil under her fingernails. At table 12, I noticed a man I didn't recognize. Silver-haired, late 50s, expensive watch. He was watching my son the way you watch something you own. Philip Strand. I had expected him. I took my seat at the head table and did not look at him again. Garrett was warm all evening. He held my hand during the cocktail hour and told me I looked beautiful. His wife brought me a glass of wine and squeezed my shoulder and said she was so glad I was there. The slideshow ran, and there were photographs of Garrett as a child, of Thomas, of the three of us at Christmas in 1991, when Garrett was 18, and I had no idea what the next 30 years would hold. I held my face still through all of it. At 8:15, the MC called me to the podium for the mother's toast. I stood up. The room quieted. Garrett smiled at me from his seat, and it was his real smile, the one from the wedding photograph. And for just a moment, I let myself wonder if I had the whole thing wrong. I didn't. I thanked everyone for coming. I talked about my son as a boy, the way he used to leave his bicycle on the front porch for me to trip over, the way he'd called me from his college dorm the week he got his first job offer, so excited he could barely get the words out. I watched people smile. I watched Garrett's eyes go soft. Then I stopped smiling. Marriage, I said, is built on trust. So is family. So is every important thing. And sometimes the people we love most are the ones we have to be most honest with. The room shifted. Garrett's expression changed. Barely. Just a flicker. But I know that face better than I know my own. I nodded toward Roy. He pressed a button. A screen lowered behind me. I turned to face it with the audience. The first document appeared. The successor trustee amendment, dated 14 months ago. Section 11 highlighted in yellow. I turned back to the room. 14 months ago, I said, I signed a document my son brought to my home after Sunday dinner. He told me it was a routine state requirement. I signed it because I trusted him. I would like to show you what I actually signed. Garrett stood. Mom, please sit down. He didn't. Garrett, sit down. He sat. His wife had gone the color of the tablecloth. Section 11 of this document, I continued, allows the successor trustee to initiate a cognitive evaluation without my knowledge. If I am found impaired by a licensed physician, full control of the Whitmore Trust transfers in 72 hours. No court, no notice, no recourse. Murmurs. Someone at table 3 said something to his neighbor. I clicked the remote. The second slide appeared. An email from my daughter-in-law to Philip Strand's firm. Foundation donor list attached. Third quarter asset inventory attached. March 19th, 2024. My daughter-in-law stood up. That was, I continued. For 8 months, my foundation's financial records were being sent to a man named Philip Strand, who is sitting at table 12. Mr. Strand manages estate liquidations. He has been the managing partner in 7 trust transfers in 6 years. In 4 of those cases, the original trustee was first declared cognitively impaired. Every head in the room turned toward table 12. Strand didn't move. He looked at his watch. I clicked the remote again. A bank statement. A wire transfer. $40,000 from my son's personal account to an account held by Dr. Martin Fenwick. Dated October 14th, 2024. Dr. Fenwick, I said, was scheduled to evaluate me Monday morning. He was hired to find me cognitively impaired. His assessment was not going to be based on any examination. I can tell you this because Dr. Fenwick is Philip Strand's brother-in-law. They share a home address in Westport. I have the documentation. The room was very quiet. I looked at table 7. Margaret was sitting straight, her hands folded, watching me. The day before yesterday, I said. I came to Hargrove's flower shop to pick up these centerpieces. Margaret Hargrove asked me to stay. I want her to say what she heard. Margaret stood. Her voice was steady. I heard them through the wall, she said. Garrett and his wife in the office next door. Garrett said the transfer had to happen before the party. He said once she was surrounded by people who knew her, it would get complicated. His wife asked about the cognitive assessment. He said the doctor didn't anticipate complications. She looked at my son. I heard you both, she said. Twice. Garrett was on his feet again. This is a misunderstanding, he started. A woman's voice from near the back of the room cut him off. It's not. Everyone turned. Vera Hutchins stood up from table 9. She was 70 years old, white-haired, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the expression of someone who had long since stopped being afraid of rooms like this one. My name is Vera Hutchins, she said. Philip Strand managed my estate transfer in 2021. He brought in a doctor to evaluate me. The doctor said I had moderate cognitive impairment. I did not. My granddaughter hired an independent neurologist, and I passed every test. I spent 14 months in litigation to get my own assets back. She looked directly at Strand. He sat there with the same expression, unmoved. Practiced. I know what he does, Vera said. And I'm glad you're stopping it. She sat back down. I turned back to the room. The trust transfer is scheduled to execute automatically at 9 o'clock tonight. She checked the clock on the far wall. In 11 minutes, Garrett lunged toward the door. 2 men I positioned near the exit stepped in front of him. He pulled up short. Susan Goldman stood from her corner table. Your Honor, she said. A man at table 6, 70 years old, silver-haired, the kind of presence that quiets rooms, stood. Retired Connecticut Superior Court Judge Bernard Alcott, who had known Thomas since 1995 and who had agreed to be here tonight when I called him Thursday morning at 7 a.m. The emergency injunction is in effect as of 9 p.m., Susan said. All trust assets are frozen pending investigation. The clock on the wall turned to 9. The screen behind me changed. 2 words in red letters, trans for bloke. 3 officers who had been seated as guests stood up simultaneously and walked toward the head table. Garrett was still standing near the exit, breathing hard. The lead officer approached him. Garrett, you are being detained for questioning in connection with financial fraud, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraudulent medical evaluation. You have the right to remain silent. My son looked at me. I have spent 62 years looking at that face. I know it the way. You know a house you grew up in, every angle, every shift of light, every mood. I know the face he made at 7 when he broke the kitchen window and was trying to decide whether to lie about it. I know the face he made at 40 when Thomas's diagnosis came in and he thought I wasn't looking. I know the face he was making now. It wasn't the face of someone who was surprised. It was the face of someone who understood, finally, that the plan had failed. He didn't say anything. The officers let him out. Strand was arrested at the door. He went quietly. His lawyer had probably told him to. My daughter-in-law sat at the table with her hands in her lap and cried. Not the crying of someone who has been caught. The crying of someone who knows they have lost something permanent. She was not charged that night. Susan had advised against pushing for her immediate arrest. There was enough ambiguity in her role, how much she knew when she knew it, that overreaching would only complicate the fraud case against Garrett and Strand. She would face a separate review. I didn't look at her when they let Garrett out. I couldn't. After the officers had gone and the guests had begun to leave, slowly, in small clusters with the stunned quiet of people who had witnessed something they would be telling their children about, I stepped down from the podium. My knees were steady. I was surprised by that. Margaret was at my elbow before I'd taken 3 steps. She didn't say anything. She just handed me a glass of water and stood beside me while the room emptied. Roy found me near the door. Injunction is solid, he said. Cedarwood Holdings is frozen. The fraud referral goes to the state AG's office Monday morning. The Fenwick complaint is filed with the medical board tonight. Good. Your son's attorney will have him out on bail by morning. The criminal case takes time. I know. He studied me. You did something hard tonight. I lost my son a long time ago, I said. I just didn't know it yet. Roy nodded once and left. The room was almost empty. The centerpieces I'd picked up from Margaret's shop were still on the tables, white roses and eucalyptus. Exactly what I'd ordered 6 weeks ago for a party. I thought I understood. They looked strange now, too bright. I drove home alone. The house was quiet. I sat in Thomas's chair in the study and looked at his photograph for a long time. I kept my promise, I said. The house is still ours. I slept. The months that followed had a shape I hadn't expected. Not the clean shape of resolution, but something slower and less certain. The shape of a life reassembling itself after an impact. Garrett was charged in February. 8 counts: wire fraud, elder financial abuse, fraudulent document filing, conspiracy. Philip Strand faced 12. The case was expected to take 18 months to reach trial. Dr. Fenwick surrendered his medical license in March. The Connecticut Medical Board opened a formal investigation into his prior assessments. 3 other families came forward. Vera Hutchins filed a civil suit against Strand for the second time, this time with my documentation as supporting evidence. My daughter-in-law cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for reduced exposure. She was not charged criminally. She resigned from her position at the foundation the same week. I hired an independent firm to audit the trust. It took 11 weeks. Everything Thomas built was intact. The foundation was intact. The house was intact. In April, I underwent my own cognitive evaluation, voluntarily, at Yale. An independent neurologist named Dr. Patricia Webb. 2 days of testing. Her report said, no evidence of cognitive impairment. Memory and executive function consistent with an individual 15 to 20 years younger. Patient demonstrated exceptional clarity in financial reasoning and strategic recall. I read that line 3 times. Not because I needed the validation, because Thomas would have laughed. I declined press interviews. I had nothing to say to anyone I didn't already know. I had dinner with Susan and Roy in May, at the same diner on Route 9 where we'd met the Thursday before the party. We talked about nothing consequential. The weather, a book Roy had read, a renovation Susan was doing to her office. At some point, Susan looked at me across the table and said, "Are you all right?" I thought about it. "I'm the same," I said. She nodded like that was a complete answer. Maybe it was. In June, a letter arrived. Handwritten, Connecticut postmark. I recognized the handwriting before I opened it. Garrett had written to me once a week every summer when he was at camp from age 9 to age 14. 37 letters, all in a shoebox in the hall closet. I recognized the handwriting. I set the letter on the kitchen table and stood there for a while without opening it. The oak tree outside was in full leaf. A bird I couldn't identify was making noise somewhere in the branches. I made coffee. I sat down. I opened the letter. He had written 4 pages, not excuses or not mostly excuses. I had expected excuses. He wrote about Thomas, about the year Thomas died, and how Garrett had felt something close. When the estate work started, something like order returning, and how Strand had appeared at the right moment, with the right language, and the wrong intentions, and how Garrett had let himself be persuaded because persuasion is easier when you already want to believe something. He wrote, "I told myself you didn't need the money, that you'd be looked after, that it wasn't really taking because you had enough." I understood while I was writing it. How hollow that sounds. He wrote, "I don't expect to come back from this. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to believe that the person in that retirement party isn't the only person I've been. I'm not sure that matters, but I needed to say it." The last paragraph was short. He wrote, "I keep thinking about the bicycle on the porch. You never made me feel bad about that. You just moved it. I don't know why I keep thinking about that." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and set it on the table beside my coffee. I sat there in the kitchen in the morning light for a long time. The bird in the oak tree was still going. The coffee got cold. I don't know what comes after a letter like that. I don't know what I owe him or what I owe myself or where those two things meet. Thomas would have known. He always understood the architecture of how people fit back together after things broke. I never learned that part as well as he had. What I know is this. I built something. Thomas and I built it together, and then I held it alone for 13 years, and the people who tried to take it did not succeed. The house is still standing. The foundation still grants money every year to the organizations Thomas cared about. The oak tree is still in the yard. Some days that feels like enough. I still have Margaret's centerpieces. Well, the vases. I kept them. They're on the dining room table now, with fresh flowers I cut from the yard, roses from the bush. Thomas planted in 1999. Every time I walk past them, I think about standing in the dark in the back of that flower shop, her hand tight on my wrist, listening. Sometimes the truth finds you in the most ordinary places. A flower shop on a Tuesday. A wall that's thinner than anyone knew. A woman who held on and didn't let go. I'm still here. If you're still here with me, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I love knowing how far these stories travel. And if this story made you think about something, about trust, about family, about what we build and who we let close to it, I'd be glad to know. There's more to come. I've thought a lot about what made all of this possible, not the fraud. I understand how that happened. What I mean is, what made it stoppable? Because it almost wasn't. The honest answer is that I paid attention when I was young, and I kept paying attention when it wasn't comfortable. Thomas used to say that most people stop learning the moment their life gets stable. They figure they've earned the right to coast. And maybe they have. But coasting is how you end up signing documents at your kitchen table because your son told you it was routine and you wanted to believe him. I believed him because I wanted to. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not Garrett's choices. Those are his to carry. Mine. I saw the shifts. The meetings I wasn't told about. The way Philip Strand reappeared after years of silence, right around the time the estate conversation started. I noticed and I filed it away, and I didn't pull it back out, because pulling it back out would have meant asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. There's a cost to willful blindness. I don't mean that as punishment. I mean it as plain mechanics. When we choose not to see something true, we take on the work of maintaining that fiction, and that work is exhausting, and eventually the thing we refuse to see finds a way to make itself impossible to ignore. A florist's wall. A Thursday afternoon. 2 voices in a transfer scheduled for 9 p.m. Saturday. The truth doesn't wait forever. It just waits until you can't avoid it. What I know about intelligence. Real intelligence. Not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that keeps you standing when the floor drops out, is that it has almost nothing to do with being smart, and almost everything to do with being honest. Honest about what you see. Honest about what you want to be true versus what is true. Honest about when you need help and who deserves your trust and what your signature on a document actually means. Garrett was smart. He is smart. That didn't protect him or me from anything. Roy Ingram was smart too, in a different way. He asked 3 questions and followed one thread and found the whole architecture in 11 hours. The difference wasn't intelligence. It was what they each did with what they knew. And then there's Vera Hutchins, standing up in a room full of strangers. 14 months after her own ordeal, with nothing to gain and everything to risk, saying, "I know what he does. I'm glad you're stopping it. That's not intelligence. That's not strategy. That's something older and harder to name. The willingness to show up for someone else's fight because you survived your own and you understand now what survival costs. And you'd rather spend some of that cost on making the next person's road a little less steep." I think about Margaret too. She heard those voices on a Wednesday. She called me Thursday morning at 6 a.m. She could have decided it wasn't her business. She could have told herself she'd probably misheard, that it was complicated, that families have their own dynamics she didn't understand. She had every reasonable out. She didn't take any of them. There's a kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel brave in the moment. It just feels like the only thing you can live with afterward. Margaret had that. Vera had it. I hope, when it counted, I had it too. What I know now, that I didn't know when Thomas was alive, the things we build don't protect themselves. Not money, not houses, not companies, not families. They need tending. They need honest eyes on them, regularly, without sentimentality. The moment you stop looking clearly at something you love, you've left a door open. I'm still here. The oak tree is still in the yard. That's enough for today. Tomorrow I'll keep paying attention.